All right, we are just shy of 100 people on the call, which is amazing. So everybody see the slides on the screen okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay, well, everybody, thanks for joining. Wow, up well over 100 people, which is fantastic for kicking this off. I know last I looked, we had well over 150 on the Slack channel, which is amazing. So really appreciate everybody's interest in this and contributions to date. So I'll spend some time going over some materials, talking about how I envision trying to organize this team, and then hopefully leave some time for some discussion at the end as well. So let's dive in. Let's see. If everybody can go on mute, that would be awesome. There we go. All right, hold on. Let me go back here. All right, one more try. Okay, let me introduce myself really quick. I don't think I've met most of the people on the call, although I've gotten a lot of LinkedIn requests over the past week, which is awesome. So I'm getting to know a bunch of you. My name is Steve Wilson, and my day job is I'm the Chief Product Officer at Contrast Security. Some of you, if you're longtime OWASP people, you may know my coworker, Jeff Williams, who's the CTO here at Contrast Security. Jeff's a longtime OWASP guy. But after some discussion where I was looking at some of the issues around this, he encouraged me to think about starting up a top 10 list at OWASP, and it sounded like a fun idea. So by way of personal introduction, I did my first AI startup right out of college in the early 90s. It's called Emergent Behavior, and we were using what are now very unfashionable AI algorithms like genetic algorithms and also some neural networks. But then they invented the internet, and I decided, they invented the World Wide Web, and I decided I better figure out how that worked. And somehow I wound up at Sun Microsystems, where I was an early member of the Java team. And I've worked at other places like Oracle and Citrix, and I've been at Contrast.
Recording in progress.
Which is in the application security space for about 2.5 years. And I live in San Jose, California, out here in the Bay Area. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on really the need for this, but what I will say is we all see this where certainly generative AI is in the news consistently, but more and more we're seeing the need for security as a really critical area. And I think that's why we're seeing so much interest in this group. And I think that's one of the reasons that this is exciting, is I think that what this group puts together is something that can be really foundational, really important, and garner a lot of attention out there in the industry, and even just in terms of general attention as well. So I really appreciate everybody's participation. In terms of what I'm hoping we can do as a group here, I think the first thing that I wanted to make sure that we do, and this is an indication that we're off to a great start, is I would like to build a community where we have a set of experts on AI security. And I think given the group we have on this call, the group that we have in the Slack channel, people who've already started contributing ideas in the GitHub area, we're building that expertise together, which is awesome. And we have a lot of people with a lot of experience here, and a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and we will get to explore that together. I think the thing that can be cool about the top 10 list for us is that it really has the possibility to become a very foundational work that is referenced in a lot of other places. And, you know, my own company that I work for, we're going through putting together our first policy on how people can use AI technology within our company. And I think every company is going to be building one of those. And in building that policy for ourselves, what you realize is you want to be able to reference things that don't exist yet, like a top 10 list saying, follow these kinds of guidelines for secure coding. They don't exist. This is the opportunity to build some of those things. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see this referenced even in government standards and otherwise if we do a good job with this. The other thing, and we'll get into this, and it's already kind of cropped up as an area for debate, is we could take a very narrow view on what a vulnerability is when it comes to large language models. Or we could take a very broad view. And I think there's already a lot of discussion on the Slack channel around this. And I do, in my own head, I'm starting to think about really AI security is important. AI safety might be another term that we want to banty about, but it's really how do we make it more safe for people to use these AI technologies with an angle towards security. I think we're already seeing it. I'd like the discussion to be really free flowing, and I'll share the roadmap that I have in mind, which would really give us the next couple of weeks to just drive a lot of discussion on the team and get everybody's ideas out there before we start to narrow back down and really commit to the exact direction that the document's going to take. The other thing is I want to push really hard over the next couple months to get us to a 1.0 version so that there is a foundational document out there that people can build off of. After that, I very much envision this settling down into a cadence more like a traditional top 10 list where maybe it gets updated once a year. But I'd like to really push hard with this team to get the first version of it out. So in terms of the community, in terms of the community that we're building here, let's see, folks, if you can go on mute, that would be great. Well, I said 150 experts. We got 168 people on the call. We have people from across the globe. I've seen people contributing from Japan, from Europe, from the United States, which is awesome. If I just go through and looked at people's LinkedIn profiles from introducing themselves in the Slack channel or putting themselves on the contributors list, we have a who's who of corporations working on AI, whether it's the cloud hyperscalers, chip vendors. Really cool to see that. We've got startups in the security space, university researchers. I feel like we have a really broad spectrum represented here, which should really put us in good stead to come up with something that's broadly applicable. In terms of the resources that we're going to use, I think a lot of people have waded in and started using them already, but I want to outline kind of how I see this coming together. We have the OWASP website, which, and I think in many ways will be the public face of the project. And I want to keep that relatively stable, and we'll update that periodically when there are big new things to share outside of the working team. The things that the working team are going to be primarily using as our means of collaboration are not necessarily the GitHub repo. I don't envision us, at least early on, operating on pull requests on source code files, although I'm sure we'll get there as we get further along. But it's really the Slack instance. If you haven't signed up for that yet, please go do that. There are links on the wiki. And I think the GitHub wiki is really what I would like to use for the next few weeks as the center of the brainstorming, and I'll show how I see that working. Okay, so in terms of what I think we're going to need to really get this done, obviously we have a number of experts here, people who are familiar with research, but really beyond that, to make this really happen, what we're going to need are people who want to write. Some people are already contributing in terms of putting it up on the wiki. I'll share the links to the wiki here, but if you go to the GitHub repo site. I'll show you where that happens in a second. I've already had some people volunteer to be editors, which I think is great. And when it comes to the public version of the website, I'm really looking for maybe 1 or 2 people who would like to be involved in the design of the website as we get towards more stable releases and we try to make that attractive and useful for people to navigate. I would love to have some people who want to help program manage this. This is turning out to be a larger project than I envisioned, where we're going to have more contributors, more debate, and potentially sub-projects as well. And, you know, I've seen people who have been interested in going just purely beyond a top 10 list to make libraries of vulnerabilities, other possible things. We'll talk about that a little bit as we get down the line. But if you're interested in particular in leading a sub-project, let me know about that. So again, on the OWASP Slack instance, easiest way to get a hold of me, and several of you have done it, is just Slack me there. I'm gonna get philosophical for just a minute, and I promise we won't stay here too long, but we all see the rate of change here. You know, we go from a place where generative AI was comparatively obscure, not well known, to the introduction of ChatGPT, moving from version 3 to version 4. We see the dramatic improvements, and you know, there is a new angle on this that is coming out every day. And you know, what that means is what we're doing is important. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here that if we look at the rate of change here, we are on an exponential curve. And that means things are going to change really, really rapidly. And, you know, pick your favorite science fiction movie, your favorite, or you're not as far away from this as you think. And all of these movies were only fun movies because people did not do the foundational work on safety and security. And so this is an opportunity for us to get in front of these outcomes before we get there. And that is why I want to move really aggressively over the next 8 weeks. And so if you're all up for this, we're going to go on a journey together. We're going to push really hard for the next couple months. And let me walk you through what I'm thinking about in terms of a roadmap. So hard to believe it was just a week ago that I posted the announcement. Since then, I think that announcement's gotten about 7,000 or 8,000 views. And again, hundreds of people now have reached out and touched this. So today we're having the kickoff, and we're officially starting the brainstorming and commentary phase. I'll walk through what that means, but the fact is that clearly started in the last week. And the idea is I would like to take that next 2 weeks and kind of continue on in the vein that we're in with discussions on the Slack channel, as well as contributing on the wiki. And I'll show you exactly how I envision that happening. At the end of that 2 weeks, we're going to have another one of these meetings. I will be posting that this afternoon with an updated Zoom link and things to the website. But we're going to get together after that, and we're going to talk about how do we take all of the ideas that got generated. I'm going to be looking for people who are really active in the discussion and in terms of contributing commentary, and building a smaller group that's going to take all of that and push over the next 2 weeks towards the end of June to publishing what I'm kind of terming a 0.5 version, which would be a major revision of the 0.1 that I put out with the announcement. And, you know, that 0.1 was the work of one person, and I've seen a lot of commentary and criticism, which I think is awesome. I think the power of having a group of experts like this, we can come up with something much more comprehensive and much more powerful than that. So that first draft of that would be at the end of June. Then we'd go into 2 weeks where people can comment on that. we can further refine it and drive towards in mid-July publishing what we'll call version 0.9. You could call it a 1.0 release candidate, but that would be a place where we can basically look at really ramping this down, locking this down, and moving towards publication of a 1.0 version. So what I'd love to get out of the next couple of weeks in terms of the brainstorming and commentary questions, you know, big questions have already started coming up. Do we have the right issues? Do we have the right descriptions of those issues? I think there's a lot of different ways we can take that. Seen a lot of commentary about, are some of these generic security issues? Are they specific to large language models and AI? I think a lot of those things will be in how we craft them. And, the extreme case is a prompt injection, just an instance of an injection attack, which is the thing that's always top of the generic top 10 list. It is, that's why it's called that. But I think when you narrow it and you look at it in particular, there's so much that goes into that. And it winds up actually being so different in terms of what the threat is, how you would avoid it, what you need to learn about it. So I think that's where that's going to get interesting. When we look at how do we categorize things, I've seen a lot of proposals already coming out in terms of maybe how we group these things together. How do we defend for them? What are the best practices? And ultimately, I think where we'll get to a lot of debate in terms of what this means for us is there are things that clearly fall into the vulnerability camp, which is the sweet spot for the top 10. We then get into things that I will term in terms of correctness, where they're clearly, call them bugs or misbehaviors in these large language models, but are they vulnerabilities? Well, that's where we got to think about how we scope that into this context. There's certainly all sorts of moral issues with bias and other issues, safety issues, and ultimately governance issues. And I do think that this document wants to become a foundational piece for feeding into these things. And certainly us building commentary as a team to educate people on the issues could be a really great use for the expertise that we have on this team. So in terms of how this is going to operate, this is the wiki. If everybody goes to the repo, you can just see there's a little button that says wiki. And if you click on the wiki button, you will wind up here. I decided to open this up as a wiki because, within hours of putting this together, I had multiple people submitting pull requests into the top 10 list, which is great. But it was going to be a lot to try and manage that way. And we just don't have enough hierarchical structure to do that right now. So I've opened up the permissions on this wiki. Anybody can go ahead and edit it. Just click edit. It is versioned, so we can see who makes what changes. And if things get out of whack, we can figure out how to repair those because it is all versioned. But there are a couple areas of the wiki that I want to draw people's attention to. So one is what I call the brainstorming area. And one is what I'll call the commentary area. And these are going to be the two places where over the next week, I'd like people to focus their efforts in addition to the discussions on the Slack channel. But these are places where you can make artifacts that have a little more permanence, where people who are not sitting in the Slack channel all day can kind of come in, understand what people are proposing, and we can use that to synthesize the next version of the document. So this is the brainstorming area. I seeded it with the 0.1 version of the top 10 list, but you'll notice here it's marked as unversioned because people have already started to basically hack on it. And again, go ahead and click the edit button. What I'm asking people to do is ideally do not go in and remove parts of this document. Go ahead and add commentary, put it in italics, sign it. That way we know it's from you. But this will give us a place where if you want to add something to one of these, go ahead. I've also had people start to end add at the end of the document additional lists of vulnerabilities, alternate takes on these vulnerabilities, all those are good. Just go ahead and put them in here. This will be one of our central resources. The other one is the commentary page, and that's actually, there's been some more added since I took this screenshot the other day, but these were some of the first pieces of commentary that people just put out on their own before we really even got the group going, just based off reading the 0.1 version. So I've linked them here so everybody can review them and see what people had to say about the list. Other people have added, one individual decided to add a whole new wiki page, take a whole different crack at the top 10, which I think was great, and linked it here. So it doesn't have to be on this wiki. If you want to put something on your LinkedIn, if you want to tweet things,
Okay.
if you have your own blog site, knock yourself out.
We go now? Okay.
Yeah, everyone mute, please. If I knew where the control was to do that, I would do it, but I can't find it right now. But go ahead and basically just put yourself in the table, click edit, add to the table, point to your commentary, any platform you want. That way people can go ahead and read that. And again, take that into account as we go to synthesize the next version of the doc. So possible sub-projects, I have had people suggest, I even think I saw it in the chat in terms of, you know, does somebody want to build WebGoat for large language models, vulnerable code, applications, models? I think that's a super cool idea. Maybe much more deep dives into some of the attacks and exploits than you'd have in the kind of the standard top 10 list. Certainly things like prompt injection, super top of mind for people. Nobody seems to quite know what the answers are. Let's see. Yeah, I know a bunch of you guys are suggesting how I do this, but I don't see it. So it's on me. But we're almost through this part and then we'll get into the discussion part. So just a note for folks who are working in this space and maybe building products. Contrast isn't building AI security products today, but we are thinking about how to use generative AI. But I know that there are people in the group who are working at companies building generative AI products or even security specifics, AI security specific products. You're welcome to participate. If you're going to comment about things that really do relate exactly to your line of business, please be transparent about that. That's all I ask. But this is a vendor neutral project. I work at Contrast, but it's not a Contrast project. This is an OWASP project. I did put a page on the wiki for if you want to sort of sign up and show that you're contributing and you support the project, please go ahead and drop in some links there. If you would like to sign up your company as supporting the project, there's a place for you to do that as well. And, you know, please go ahead and just use your own judgment there. All right, so discussion time. It's probably be a little bit of a challenge, but we do have some time. We have 172 people on right now. So I'm going to put the slides away for now. And I'm going to put this in gallery mode so I can at least see a bunch of you. But if people have comments or questions, just open up your mic, go ahead and ask, and let's see if we can do this. If it gets too complicated, we'll try some kind of hand-raising protocol.
Hey, Steve, great job so far. I really like the information and the way you're approaching this. My initial thought is that there's a contradiction between open and secure. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about is the underlying extensions that AI is being used by the cloud providers to enhance things that have already been approved for use, but underlying models are being utilized in ways that are unanticipated or sometimes even unknown. So transparency, I think, is key to understanding what the risk is and how to mitigate it.
Yeah, I think, ultimately, like other kinds of software, there's probably a need for supply chain security, SBOMs of their own flavor. And that's could be a really interesting topic for discussion. Certainly letting people know what's underneath these things is going to be an interesting challenge.
Well, how
Great.
it's being used is the problem, because we have these, what they call fine tuning or modeling, and those models are then used in ways that are unanticipated by the platform because they're building a profile or a pattern, as they want to call it, to help answer other people's questions about your queries. So there's a lot of IP concerns, intellectual property, as well as business strategy that can be inadvertently utilized in ways that are unanticipated. And I think that's the biggest concern. We're seeing Italy and Spain, Europe, blocking a lot of these models. And I think there's a reaction to that because of the unknown.
Yeah, privacy concerns, data leakage, intellectual property leakage out of your company into these models. We've seen instances of that, Samsung and other places. It's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, this is great stuff, Steve. So my name is Daniel, and I'm interested in. I'm kind of standing up a sister project on the side that is kind of a broader set of things. It's more like attacking AI implementations and all the different pieces that lead into that, all the stuff before and after. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on that were, because you have LLM in the title here. And I'm part of the AI Village along with some colleagues as well. And there's quite a bit of focus in the AI Village at DEF CON also on the LLMs themselves. And the way that myself and a few other colleagues are thinking about this is like, it's quite a bit about how things are routed to LLMs and how things are passed through and how things even get into the system in the first place. And what happens after the LLM interaction as well. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on having sort of a sister project around that, and just your or anyone else's thoughts there.
Yeah, I just want to second that. Sorry, hi, I'm Rich. I'm part of the AI Village too, full disclosure.
Hey,
So
what's up, Rich?
how you doing? Yeah, I just strong agree to all of that. Really, as I was looking through the initial draft of the top 10 list, my big concern is a lot of those vulnerabilities in some ways are less like actual vulnerabilities and more like, oh gee, I wish large language models didn't work that way.
Yeah.
And so I brought this up in the Slack channel. I think there's a discussion to be had about the positioning of this. And I think really what is maybe going to be more impactful and possibly even more accessible to people that actually use and develop with this stuff is reframing it as here's bad integration practices.
Yeah.
So the LLM itself is just fundamentally going to produce text. So prompt injection is just kind of the way they work, right? Training data leakage is just kind of the way they work. And really what you want to focus on is, okay, what are the build arounds for that are actually causing this to have adverse impacts? And so the integration bit, the pattern, these are bad patterns for integrating these because people don't have good mental models about how these large language models work, is maybe a good place to sort of get entry into, sort of bridge the gap between ML folks and security folks.
Yeah.
I want to add to that a little bit, and that's whenever we start talking about anything to do with ethics or responsible AI, none of that should be part of this. So OWASP doesn't have a background in that, at least as far as I've known the organization for a long time. And much like Rich just said, much of this is an AI issue. Where OWASP is going to be able to help the community is those integration points, bad APIs, bad websites and how they build them and not sanitizing data that's sent. So when we start talking about, oh, hey, this gives a biased response, that is not what this group should be worried about at all. That's Harvard responsible AI, not this. And if everybody is here because this is the hot topic, right? since December, everybody has been talking about generative AI, and a lot of this kind of feels like a bandwagon. There is already several groups out that have been there for years. So how do we take this group and actually integrate something that has already been talked about, but find out where they're missing the security that OWASP is known for? And how do we, take that and make this group that type of group?
Yeah, Brian, I think what you're saying is really interesting. So I've run into this problem on the mobile project, on the web application project. Like I've seen this multiple times. It comes down to what fundamentally is the soul of the project. What is it trying to do? And I think it ends up being one of my favorite pieces of trivia about security is that it's two words from Latin, se and cura, without worry. Right? So the job of security people is to allow the public to not worry as much. So what are the things that people should be worrying about with AI or with LLMs? And what is the top 10 ways to worry less about those things if you do those things? And I think that helps frame these sort of conversations down to like, what are the top things? Because everyone, like you said, everyone's freaking out. They don't know what they're supposed to do. There's a million things. Actually, there's 100 things you could possibly do. But what are the top 10? And it's not implying that everything is included in the top 10. It is literally just the top 10. So hopefully that helps kind of scope things.
Yeah, if I may, I agree with Brian and maybe try to continue Daniel's thought. There is overlap with machine learning or application or system security risk. For instance, if we consider data poisoning, it's basically a machine learning risk that applies also for LLMs. At the same time, if we consider sandboxing or SSRF, these are risks of the infrastructure or the application below. So I'm concerned about the fact that we might consider risks that are not specific or directly specific or of the LLM, but at the same time that have an impact on that.
So I think I would like to just, from my perspective, I think a safety model that is open and researched and provided open source is really important. To Brian's point, there are a lot of experts out there on the ethics and the safety side, and there are others, communities that are looking into it as much as we are on the security side. Regardless of where it is, there are a lot of models that are being built. Some of them may not necessarily have a safety framework that's been battle tested as much, and they're put me on the camp that there should be one out there, regardless of who's built it and is maintaining it, that anyone can drop in and use it, and there's a wider conversation with regards to that. But on the top 10 and on the security side, it's important to also understand get an idea who's it for and how they're using it. And I would say I would be on the camp of phrasing it for developers who are going to be embracing large language models and just want to understand what they should be avoiding. There might be projects on training, like WebGoat or LlamaGoat, or also the other way, the top 10 for proactive controls. For the top 10 for this one to be productive, I think it should be focused on the security piece, but not ignoring all the other elements. And then the other thing is with Andrew Vanderstock and the guys working at OWASP Top 10, they've built a really good methodology on both the research side. So this is a new project. We don't have necessarily data on a lot of vulnerabilities, right? Because it's brand new. They've built a methodology of how do you take industry experts and decide what goes in. And then the other one is, over time, how do you actually make data-driven decisions as well? So I'd recommend also some conversations there. But to step on the gas, like the approach that you've done, Steve, completely support on that side. So thank you.
Yeah, you make a great point, and I just wanted to double down on that, I do envision this eventually falling into much the same template as the other top 10 lists, and we'll take everything that we know where later on we can be very data driven around that. There are a lot of comments here not surprisingly, it's exactly the discussion that I figured we'd have. The debate is like not on the specifics of a vulnerability, but like what does a vulnerability mean to us? And if we're gonna have a top 10 list, it's like a top 10 list of what? The thing I'd encourage people in the spirit of brainstorming over the next 2 weeks, you can certainly put out commentary that says, I don't think we should consider this, or you don't think we should consider this. Anything is fair game. But what I would say is, if you feel strongly about things that should be in the list that are not, put those out there, because ultimately the wonder of a top 10 list is if we get all the ideas out there and we have way more than 10 things, it becomes very easy to take a group this large and start to do things like voting and other things to down select to a top 10 list that I think we'll start to feel really good about. So please do take the next 2 weeks to just continue to get those ideas out there on what you think should be in the list. And I see Gavin raising his hand very politely, so go ahead.
So in the spirit of this discussion, something that I have to ask myself, first off, full disclosure, quick intro, I'm also part of the AI Village as well. We work on the intersection of AI and security. So the question that I have in the back of my mind is the top 10 list the appropriate way to have this discussion? I think this discussion is important to have, especially for developers, and as we're trying to communicate to the broader developer community so that people understand how these technologies work. But looking at the original list, and as far as how traditional top 10 lists are, I made a comment earlier where they usually have, here's what it is, here's how it works, here's some examples, and here's how you mitigate it. A lot of these, to Rich's point, is just how the systems work. So the question is like, is this people using the technology in the wrong way, or is this a problem with the technology itself? And so when I think about like the best way to have this conversation, just, you know, my own opinion, take it with a grain of salt. I think of things as like the OWASP threat modeling framework or ASVS, right? So more recommendations and education towards the developer community, talking about here's what these models do, here's how these work. Like people are making a lot of assumptions, and that's where people are running into issues, right? There was a recent news story about a lawyer who heard like, oh, GPT-4 can pass the bar exam, so why don't I have it write my brief? And then it did a very good job. It just made up a bunch of crap. And that's not a problem with the technology. It's a problem with how it's used and how it's being communicated to people. So the big question, just to kind of circle back, is the top 10 list the appropriate way to have this conversation, or should we be looking at a larger project, again, like the OWASP threat modeling or the ASVS?
Great point.
Gavin, I think we're making a fundamental mistake here. We're assuming that the end user of this is going to be more developers, but that's not what's happening in the real world. So those of us who do this on a daily basis are starting to see that the people experimenting with it, there's all this chat GPT restrictions at organizations and everything else. But what they're not realizing is that everyday people at companies are experimenting with API access, because you can literally copy and paste a couple of lines and then automate access to the API endpoint, which is every bit as error prone as anything else. So we have to realize that the end user of this may not be a developer at all, or may not be a security person. It may just be somebody who's empowered to try to make some change inside the department, inside of a larger organization. And that may be something a bit different about this project than some of the previous projects.
To your point, Nathan, just real quick, those people aren't going to be looking at an OWASP top 10 because they're not looking at anything security to begin with.
Good point. Yeah, that was my point about the cloud was the first iteration of this. Remember when cloud first came out and the cloud first initiative, everyone went to cloud because that was the hype, that was the marketing. That's what this is. It's just, again, a hype and a marketing approach. It's a response to the consumer base, which isn't going to be secure, isn't going to be thinking about security. So the top 10 is a great way, I think, to at least provide some mechanism to identify what someone needs to think about when they approach this solution. And people will not do it at first, but they will come back to it. So it's still going to be an important approach, I think.
One thing I want to tack on to the end of that comment, this will be brief, I promise. I want to make sure that as we develop this, this doesn't end up being a millstone around the neck of AI developers, right? If we put a bunch of essentially unaddressable vulnerabilities into the top 10, it's going to make this tool essentially useless because people will look at it and they go, well, I can't do anything about that, so why should I bother? So making sure that we design this with the way that LLMs actually operate and the way that generative AI actually gets incorporated into applications so that these provide like actionable, useful advice to people that are building these integrations is something that I really want to try and drive through this.
Well, I think we have number one already done. Don't trust the output. That's number one. Basically, you have to validate. Hallucinations are, coming all the time, and there's an assumption of validity because it's printed that we trust it. That should be the first message we send. Don't trust the output. Validate it. Ensure that it's accurate. Do your checks. I think that's going to be important.
So Tom, those things are more with respect to, I don't know whether trust the output or not will be part of the top 10, right? Because those things, again, it goes into the governing aspect, what Brian was mentioning. So from privacy standpoint, from governance standpoint, and even trusting the output. So those things are good, but is that the common things that we need to look into? I think that we need to differentiate upfront, so that way it's easy for the audience. What are the common issues that they're seeing from security standpoint? Privacy can be part of that, and trusting the output or not, if it is clearing the bar exam or not. So those are good discussions, but should that be part of this top 10? That we need to establish really well.
I think one of the other guiding principles is the concept of like behavior change. Like if somebody thinking of doing something unsafe, somebody told them to go look at this list. They looked at the list, and as a result, they're going to do something that's more safe, right? And that's like a huge. It's a nice compass to have, to say, is this action based? Can someone actually tangibly use this?
Well, are we talking to consumers or the enterprise? That's important.
Yeah, the answer is yes, probably.
Well, and that was part of the reason why I focused on developers, is because we still don't have an answer for who our audience is.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
So from the developer aspect, everybody's thinking, oh, it can write all the code I need and it's going to be great. And from our experience with GPT-3 in GitHub Copilot, it created a whole bunch of new vulnerabilities. It fixed the main one, creates a bunch of new ones. And then everyone's going to think, oh, this is my auto remediation plan for code. Right? So,
I mean, if we try to cure people doing dumb things with a tool, we're going to be spending a lot of time working on it. I think some of this is on the shoulders of people that are building ML chatbot integrations to make it really clear to end users what the limitations of these tools are. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm back with maybe Brian and Daniel's question about like, is the behavior of this LLM really or is someone trusting this LLM too much really a security issue, or is that a documentation and a user education issue?
I'll give you another example recently, what we are seeing in our company. So recently, Meta was fined with 1.3 billion, right? Because they were moving customer data by EU Union. So is that a security issue or not? Because all the training which happens, it doesn't happen based on the geographical region. So there might be in one particular region where we get the user data and then we train the models. So in that case, if the data is coming from EU region to something within America, is that even that we need to worry or not? It is something to worry from business standpoint, but is that part of security to worry or not? So that, fine line of difference that we need to establish, so that way audience understand what they are getting out of this top 10. And there might be other things from business standpoint, from privacy standpoint, which is important, but that is something which will not be covered as part of this top 10.
Yeah. One other thing I'll say, Steve, and it's great that you're a product manager, because you're going to have a superpower for doing this. But one thing I could tell you from being involved in like 4 of these projects is you hear how divergent the opinions are. One thing that will kill the project is if you don't make a hard choice.
Mhm.
You have to like pick, and again, I'm telling you something you already know as a product manager, but you have to decide and say, this is the identity, and please embrace or reject the identity, but we're going to deliver within that identity. Because if you get pulled in all these different directions, then it'll kind of be meh and okay, but not really great.
Yeah, let me go back to something really quick, just on that comment, because I want everyone to kind of understand the vision for how I'm attacking this. If I want to pull back up this roadmap slide, because I think there are, if we look at the phases here, it will help us think about how we approach this at different points. And, you know, if we see ourselves here on May 31st, kicking off this brainstorming and commentary phase, that's what we're doing on the call. Some people have already started to edit the wiki. These next 2 weeks for me are about expanding the realm of possibility. So not making the hard choices today in terms of what this is, because I don't think we've all had time to fully consider it. So let people get those ideas out, because maybe we will find things that we're not thinking about yet that are the exact way that we want to talk about some of these things. But then to your point, once we get past that June 15th, we're going through a progressive set of narrowing and refining, where we are going to make some hard decisions. And, you know, we'll talk about these as a group, and we will make some decisions about, is this category of issue something that's in or out of scope for this version of this list? And we'll make those hard decisions. I'll tie break where needed, but I think we'll find some consensus on a lot of this as we go forward and really start to exchange views and get some of these things out there. And what I will say is, you know, I challenge folks to get beyond just thinking about like, well, is hallucination something we should think about? The answer is certainly yes, but what about it? And if you don't just put up something that says hallucination, but you want to say something specific, if you want to actually try and write not just the title of that, but try and write the entry for a top 10 list, you probably wind up with something narrower. It's going to force itself into something that's more action oriented, because that's the wonder of the OWASP top 10 list, is it's kind of in that format. I think that'll get us away from a lot of the potentially kind of pie in the sky stuff. So just wanted to kind of reinforce, that's my vision of the roadmap here, is let's take the next 2 weeks. Let's be very inclusive of getting all the different kind of viewpoints out there, because you can hear it's pretty divergent at this point, which I think is great. We'll then spend the next 6 weeks after that narrowing this down into something that's much more focused. And, you know, when we say who's the audience, we'll know who the audience is when we see the document at the end.
So Steve, here's a different idea. So we all know that there's risks and controls that need to be put into this. How about we take what we take from the OWASP top 10, and then maybe we partner up with ISC squared as far as the risks and controls that need to be put in place, since they are two different groups that handle two different problems.
What I'll say in general is, I think the wonder of us being the top 10 group here is that does put a set of constraints on what we're doing. It's gonna have a certain shape and flavor. This is going to be far from the comprehensive guide to everything you need to know about safe and secure AI development. So yeah, we're going to have to partner up in a number of different places. And I'm really open to people who are involved in these different groups. We clearly have a bunch of people here who are involved in different teams skirting around this, so we can figure out what the relationships between the projects are and kind of map this out in a larger sense. Somebody coming new to doing secure development with AI and LLMs, how do these things fit together, and how should people be thinking about it? I think
Steve, this is Ramesh. You know, ENISA has put out a report on security threats in AI and ML systems. That was kind of like before these LLMs caught up. Maybe we can look at some of those threats listed. They're very detailed threats actually. In the ENISA reports, and then they are also talking about the AI and security standardization for AI systems, and then see which one is related to LLMs, which one are not, that kind of thing.
It's a very good document. The ANISA one is very good. Just general overall guidance. And that's kind of what I suggested earlier in the chat, is that some of the stuff we're talking about as mitigations already exist in either academic papers or industry papers. Like, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. If there's something that could potentially help here, we should just use it.
Well, and along those lines, let me just show this really quick. On the wiki here, hold on, let me share my screen again. If you're on the wiki and you go to educational resources, people, I seeded the list, but people have started adding links. So I have different areas for just sort of general consumption articles, research papers, white papers, videos. If you have materials you want to add, I would say post them here so that they get sort of officially sucked into everybody's view. If you want to also post them on the Slack channel with some commentary so people know like what they should be looking at in those terms. I don't think this should be a group that's doing a lot of foundational research. This is about crafting this into a really accessible tool for developers. So I think we do want to be leveraging any research that's out there and pulling from that and referencing back to it.
I would like just to share 2 cents. You said something that the destination audience will be obvious when we finish the document. I think we should also take some time to consider what is the destination audience, because from the whole discussion I heard at least 3 audiences. So the ones that are developing the LLMs, the ones that are developing applications on top of LLMs, and the end users. So I think it would be very, very productive to identify the audience for which we want to develop this top 10.
Yeah, I agree with that. Really strong support for that. And Gavin's point about this as well. It's better to do it earlier rather than later.
Well, I think from when you put it that way, certainly my vision is this is not a document for end users. We may find a lot of citizen developers out there, though. To use a term that I don't know is fashionable anymore, but there are going to be a lot of people dabbling with doing development. So I think we're going to have to take an expansive view of what a developer is for what that's worth. But again, for the next 2 weeks, if people here have an opinion about what shape this should take, share it with the group. By the end of the 2 weeks, we're going to be much more narrowed down in terms of what the audience is, what are the types of issues we're addressing, and then we'll go through this, this refinement phase over the next kind of 3 iterations to get to something. But I do think that we're talking to developers, and I think it's going to be a very fuzzy line personally between people who are developing language models and people who are using language models for applications. That's going to be a really blurry line as well, you know, because you see it. Everybody's going to start with something. Are they customizing something? Are they? Those are going to be the really interesting things to get into. But please, everybody, keep the ideas coming.
Can you put the wiki link in the chat?
The wiki?
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's it.
You're on mute, Steve.
Yeah, I lost your audio.
Sorry. Hey, so we're just about at the top of the hour. Anybody have any final comment that they want to get out before I wrap it up here?
Yeah, just one real quick point of information, because I see a lot of conversation in here, and we kind of had this conversation. So the term like hallucinating, a lot of AI people are kind of shying away from it because it anthropomorphizes a machine, essentially. It's a statistical model. So I think that if we want to continue that conversation as far as like best practices of using AI, like we should adopt the proper terminology for some of these things as well.
Awesome. And I think some of these things, when you do see something like there's already been a bunch of debate in the Slack channel around hallucinate. We see it here in the chat. I think a lot of what settles this debate is what we decide to actually call these things and what we want to describe about why they're important for our context. And I'm in total agreement with you on things like this. Words matter. So let's figure out what the actual issue that we're trying to address is, because hallucinate's just kind of a fun media word. All right, well, everybody, we're about at the top of the hour, so I'm going to wrap this up. I will be sharing on the Slack channel, but everybody has the wiki. The wiki is sort of the durable place. You'll see meetings posted there. If I will post the slides there. You'll see the commentary section, the brainstorming section, and then a lot of the discussion is happening on the Slack channel. If you're not on there, go join the OWASP Slack workspace. Project-top10-LLM is the channel. I expect we'll get a lot of discussion going there. I will post this recording. I think there was a lot of great discussion here, so if people want to go back and review, and I know there were people who said they couldn't make the call, and this will give them a way to catch up. But I really, really appreciate the turnout today. This is outstanding. We had, well over 150 people attend the call today, in and out, and which is amazing. It shows the interest, and I think it's going to show the power of this group and our ability to really push the boundaries on this and create something that's going to be really valuable for developers. So thanks everybody for your contributions, and I will look forward to working with you all over the next 8 weeks and generating the first version of what I think is going to be a really important document. So thanks everybody.
Coming up, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Everybody.